Spring saw events that had implications across the world, from a new pope being elected to another crisis over North Korea. It was all go at the start of the year. But we begin first in the fall, when one of the most powerful storms on record left a trail of death and destruction across the Philippines. The Philippines gets its fair share of tropical storms every year, but November saw it devastated by a typhoon of epic proportions. Super Typhoon Haiyan slammed into the central Philippines, leaving a trail of death and destruction in its wake. It was one of the most powerful storms on record and left towns and cities in ruins. Thousands of people were killed or injured, while tens of thousands more were left homeless.
We are hungry. We don't have any food.
As the scale of the disaster became clear, nations around the world rushed aid to the worst affected areas. But a week after the disaster, many complained that medicine, food, and water was still in short supply. There were reports that law and order had broken down, while bodies laid unclaimed on the streets of towns and cities. The cleanup and salvage operation is expected to take months and cost the Philippines billions of dollars. Elsewhere in Southeast Asia, Thailand endured another political crisis. Thai Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra was forced to dissolve parliament in December after weeks of anti-government protests threatened new instability in the country. Thousands of demonstrators fought police and occupied government buildings in downtown Bangkok in a bid to force Yingluck to step down. Earlier in the year, the world's more than 1 billion Catholics were surprised and shocked when Pope Benedict XVI, born Joseph Ratzinger, announced his resignation. He was elected after the death of Pope John Paul II in 2005. But Benedict said he was getting old and couldn't handle the papacy anymore. Benedict would remain as Pope Emeritus, but the question was, who would be the next pope? Cardinals from around the world were summoned for the secret election, with candidates from Asia, Africa, and Latin America the front-runners. With most of the Catholic faithful living in these continents, it wasn't too much of a surprise when in March the church celebrated the election of Cardinal Jorge Bergoglio of Argentina as the new pope. He's the first Jesuit and the first non-European in modern times to lead the world's Catholics. Unlike other recent pontiffs, Pope Francis doesn't have a numeral after his name. That's because he's the first to take the name Francis. He wanted to honor St. Francis of Assisi, an admirer of nature and a servant to the poor and destitute. He also chose to live in an apartment instead of an archbishop's palace, passed on a chauffeur limousine, and cooks his own meals. February was also eventful for South Africa when one of its biggest sports stars became embroiled in a murder scandal. Oscar Pistorius had overcome his disability to become the world's best-known Paralympian with lots of gold medals and world records to his name. He even represented South Africa at the 2012 London Olympics, and his artificial limbs earned him the nickname Blade Runner. But all the glory and fame was quickly forgotten when his model girlfriend, Riva Steenkamp, was found dead at his home. Pistorius claimed he shot her by accident, thinking there was an intruder in the house. But police formally charged the star athlete with her murder in late February. Pistorius will also face extra gun-related charges when he goes on trial for murder next year in March. And February was also when North Korea decided to test more nuclear weapons. Pyongyang had already been angered by a UN resolution in January condemning its satellite launch. The nuclear test quickly triggered the usual round of condemnations, with the United States and its allies South Korea and Japan vocal in their displeasure. Even China, one of Pyongyang's few remaining allies, expressed its concern. Things got even more tense when the U.S. and South Korea staged a series of high-profile military drills in March. It was intended as a warning to Pyongyang not to try anything stupid. For a while, Pyongyang would not back down from its hostile rhetoric. It declared that a state of war existed between it and South Korea. The U.S. said it was fully prepared to defend itself and its allies against a North Korean attack. Seoul also blamed Pyongyang for a cyber attack in late March. In another high-profile move, Pyongyang pulled all of its workers out of the Kaesong Industrial Zone, jointly run by the two Koreas. For a while, the world held its breath, wondering whether war would break out. But cooler heads started to prevail, with China and others pushing for negotiations to pull everyone back from the brink. It started a long process that eventually saw the Kaesong Park reopen in September. North Korea shocked the world again in December when it executed the powerful uncle of leader Kim Jong-un for allegedly plotting against the regime. But it wasn't just worries about North Korea. Other tensions simmered in the Asia-Pacific region, most notably over a set of islands known as the Diaoyus in China and Senkakus in Japan. They're controlled by Japan, but Beijing says they belong to China. Taiwan is another claimant, just to add to an already complicated situation. Military escalation continued into 2013. The two sides sent ships and planes into the area. In February, Japan's defense minister revealed a Chinese frigate had locked weapons targeting radar onto a Japanese destroyer and helicopter on 2 occasions in January. Chinese state media responded their frigates had been engaged in routine training at the time. In February, U.S. intelligence detected China moving ballistic missiles closer to the coast near the disputed islands. Tensions resurfaced later in the year. In October, China's Ministry of Defense reacted angrily to Japanese threats that Japan would shoot down any unmanned Chinese drone in its airspace. Military officials in Beijing declared that China would consider such action an act of war. Then in November, China extended its air defense zone to include the Diaoyus, a move which Tokyo denounced as a provocation.